Today, I'm going to be painting a couple of pussies on a base with a lady. This is Groundeffected. My name is your dad, and the model in this video is sponsored by Penny Minis. This is not a Patreon this time. This is actually a singular model that you can support this artist on, and I urge you to go check him out in the description down below. Now, it is unusual for you to see supports on my models on my table. Of course, these models have not been removed from their supports yet, and this is because I want to show you exactly what they look like. That is because in a world of models that are supported that never print very nicely, well, these ones actually do. It is quite a rare event for the supports to be good, and in this case, I would say I give these supports a thumbs up. And for that, Penny Minis, you have got my, I don't know what the words are. And for that, Penny Minis, you have got my approval. Now, this is a one-off model, and this is not something that you're gonna find every single month, a whole load of superheroes coming out of this dude. But what you do get is an original character, which is something that I really enjoy specifically myself. In a world of sames, it's nice to have a little bit of difference and a load of originality. And this model, genuinely, I love this dude's sculpting style. It may just be me, but I really love the way this guy sculpts. It's the flow, it's the expressions, it's the movement, it's absolutely everything. I really love this dude's sculpting stuff. And if you want to go and get this model for yourself, it's available in a link down below in the description. Just go down there, click it, and go and buy this model to purchase and print and paint and make. And once you've printed it, come back here and I'll show you how to paint it. Now, the waffle machine has been waffling a whole load, so let's just stop the waffle, get the preparation, get some primer on this model, and paint the damn thing. First, let's start out with a primer, and there are a couple of things on this base that are going to need to be a lighter color. So I'm going to prime them with white, and then I'm going to move on to using black primer on the rest of the parts of the model. This is because a black base is always the best to work from, in my opinion, because you've got your shadows pretty much covered, so any color you put over the top of this will be a dark version of that color. Now, of course, there is an obligatory thing on my channel whereby you have to hang your models in the most precarious way possible, otherwise are you even modeling at all? Now, of course, I do not like white as a color, so white was a good base, but I ended up using that ivory kind of color, which I'm pretty sure is called Wraithbone, from Citadel, to paint over the top of the base. And while that dries, I set about putting a zenithal or volumetric highlight over the rest of the model. That is because zenithal would just be straight from the top, but I kind of do focus on the volumes of the model as well. Very quickly, before I move on to the rest of stuff, I can quickly throw down some blue paint onto the toothbrush. That is a part of the base of this model, and I used a bit of a Drakenhof Nightshade in the shadows to give it a little bit more depth than just one solid blue. I then sprayed a gloss clear coat over it and left that aside to dry, while quickly putting down a base layer for the hairs. She has got red hair, and so, surprise, surprise, I used red to base coat her hair. Now, moving on to the body, I'm going to need to put down some colors that are going to need to dry. Before I get on to painting the base, I might as well put these on so that they can dry when I get to work on the base. And that is going to be Pinkle, but in this case, I am literally just using magenta. So really, Pinkle could be any color you really want. That kind of looks pink, I guess. I'm going to use red in the shadows, and a red ink works best for this, only because I feel like this covers better and just has a much richer feel and look to it. This helps to make the skin look a bit brighter, I think, but that's up to you, whatever you want to do with your model. As for the base, it was kind of a difficult one, because really, I need to put the white in, and there's two ways of doing this. Well, you can put in the pink first and then paint white lines, but I felt like that might be the harder way, so I decided to do it this way. But it means that I needed to do two coats, and with a bit of magic, I can have that done a little bit quicker. Now, of course, after that, there are a couple of things on the base, like a couple of pair of pantaloons, which needed to be painted in their respective colors. One of them is red, and the other one is yellow. So, obviously, I just used red and yellow to paint these. Now, really, I want you to notice that I'm not putting any other colors or shadows onto the rest of the pieces on this base. That's because there is a lot going on in this model, and the story that it's telling is obviously one of chaos. So I can place all of my highlights and shadows and everything on the main characters in this model, and this will give me a little bit more strength to kind of show off certain things that I would rather show off over other things, like for example the cats and the lady. I did, however, add a subtle highlight on the centers of each one of the tiles on the base as well, and this is just to help kind of give it a little bit more depth. But other than that, I didn't do any other separate shadows or highlights on any other parts on this base. I did then paint the cardboard that is inside of the toilet rolls that are obviously being ripped apart by these naughty little felines. And this is pretty simple, just a solid color over the insides of them. I then used a gloss clear coat over everything. This completely ruined the pieces on top of the base. So I had to then come back and paint a matte clear coat over the top of all the rest of the things on the base, just to make sure that they weren't shiny, because it would look stupid if they were shiny. So hopefully you can pick that up a little bit later. Now for the two cats, I wanted to show you that even though I'm using two separate colors, they look quite similar in color, but they're not quite similar in color. So you'll only really notice this kind of at the end of the video. You might not even notice it, to be fair, but basically one of them is a little bit warmer than the other, but they're both kind of on the cool side of things. So it's really hard to explain, but the warmer one is higher up and held in her hand, and even though I look at the references and I see that the cat's even a different color, I decided to paint them both gray kind of cats anyway, and here's where we are. So that's it. For the rest of the cat, obviously you saw that I put a highlight on him, and I'm now going to take that main color that I painted him at first and paint that over his little pads on his feet and also his nose as well. After I'm done with this, I'm going to need to start lining up his eyebrows, and I started out using that color which I thought would be dark enough, but as soon as I had painted them, I pretty much realized that it was just not strong enough of a color. So I moved on to using this camo camo brown, and I painted that over his eyebrows and also over his eyelashes as well. Yes, I had painted in the inside of that eye. I'm not sure why I did that. There was something going on at the time in my brain, possibly, but that's not the correct procedure, I don't think. And so I'm going to go paint over that again anyway, using this highlight skin color, which is a very difficult color to get because it's in a freaking set, and I really need to replace this color. I will do this as soon as I can, but for now, I'm going to use it until it's run out, and we'll figure it out when it's a problem later on. The cat's eyes are pretty easy, at least the one on the base. To be fair, they're both actually really easy. This sculptor has made such big, lovely, open eyes, and I love the fact that they did this, but the eyes are pretty simple. I used a dark brown as a base to shape, obviously, the iris of the eyes, and I made sure that he was looking at the thing that's in his hands, and then I used like a caramelly brown to paint on the inside of that, with a black dot for the pupil, and then a very bright white specular highlight. This highlight's quite large, and I do feel like this helps to really force or reinforce the light direction in your model, and this is an important thing to think of, so make sure you don't paint it the wrong direction, because if it's on the wrong side it's going to look weird. Also, for the tube of toothpaste, I literally just painted fairy dust over an unprepared surface like that. It's just raw resin. I painted fairy dust over the top of it because I had no idea what color to make this toothpaste thing, and so that's what I did. I then painted the cap with some deck tan, and then I used purple to paint the actual paste coming out of it, because I think it's purple in the renders. I'm not really sure. I tried to pay as much attention as I can to keep it original to the artist's idea of what he wanted done, but also I take a little bit of liberties for myself too, because I'm not a robot either. I'm going to use some of that wraithbone to reinforce the colors on the toilet roll. I could paint this solid white, but I've always said this, that white in the image, and when I say image, I mean the overall composition of the model, it always looks weird if you have white in it. So I try my best to avoid whites. Even though there is some whites in this, they're not very strong or very like vibrant. I've kind of covered them up a little bit like I did with that wraithbone. But I shouldn't be talking about whites. I should be telling you about how I painted the skin tones. And I did a very similar thing to what I normally do, is work my way up from darker skin tones to lighter skin tones. I like to think about them as laying down the reddish ones first. So if they look pink or kind of reddish, they've got to go down first. Not always, but in my opinion, for this style of painting, they need to go down so that you are setting out the actual undertone of the skin itself. And you can see there's kind of like a mauvey color in the shadows. This is created by by going over that red, which the red goes over the black. It's like a whole sequence of the layers. The layers are very important. As we work our way up, we kind of start working towards yellower tones, and this is because the highlights are usually going to be a little bit more yellower, and this is just the way that I paint them. This is how I like to paint it, and I feel like it really shows off the actual colors. I focus all of my colors onto the highlights, and my style for painting this has kind of changed a little bit over the years, and that is because I've kind of tried to make it as easy as possible for people to follow this style of painting. It's weird because normally I would just paint how I would want to paint, but also at the same time I got to try and think about like how others would try to duplicate this style or even just this method of painting. And so I find myself trying things that if I can find something easier, obviously I'll show you it. But the reality is you can see when I'm most comfortable with skin tones, like for example on this particular model, and I'm just using the same process that I use for almost all my models before I started experimenting a little bit too much. For highlights, I like to add a bit of white into the brighter skin tone and paint that into the specular areas, and that does desaturate the model a bit, so I use some yellow, very thin down, 3 or 4 drops of yellow to a full cup of water, and I spray that over everything to tint the skin a little bit more yellow and bring the saturation back. I put a little bit of Caribou Crimson into the hair, and while that's drying, I can then spray a satin varnish over all of the skin tones. This lady is probably just come out of the bath or about to get in the bath, and so I figured she's in the bathroom, so her skin's probably a little bit more shiny than normal. But also, lately I've been figuring that I quite like a shinier skin versus the matte of the clothes on the characters, and so this is how I went with that, and this is what I'm doing. Whether you like it or not, it's happening, and you can't even stop it unless you actually push stop, in which case I would say please don't do that and carry on watching the video to the end. Now for her robe, it's pretty straightforward really. I had to paint about 3 layers of this pink over the top of everything because for some reason, once thinned down enough to actually paint with, this color is quite transparent. So I figured I'll just do a couple of layers and then I will layer it up without you having to see before quickly painting the pantaloons. But of course, I don't want to linger on an area like this on a model, and so we'll move on very swiftly to painting the toenails, which I'm going to just literally use this highlight skin color to paint, because this lady has got white toenail paint upon her toes, and so thus forth I'm going to obviously use a color that sort of looks to be like a white to paint her toenails. And then the next thing that I'm going to need to be doing is add a bit of a highlight onto her robe, bathrobe thing, and this I'm going to use the same pink that I originally used, and I'm going to put some white ink into that, and I'm also going to turn the pressure of my airbrush all the way down to probably what people normally use, to be fair, because I use a really high air pressure normally, and I'm going to spray that very carefully, trying to avoid the skin as much as possible, and then paint the base color for the cat, which is going to be this violet gray, and I'm going to put this over everything. I thin this down on a wet palette, obviously. I mean, I say obviously, I haven't even showed you my wet palette in this video, but in case you were wondering, I use a wet palette and I put my paint on there and I thin it down, probably about 50-50 to be fair, and then I paint that in multiple layers until it is as smooth as a baby's butt. Now I'm gonna put the model that is completely done on the base so far because I get it out my way. I don't know why that was done in that timing and not at this timing. I'm not gonna, I think it's probably because I was letting something dry. You see, what I do is I like to make things kind of dry, and while it's drying I can do another task in the meantime. Thus I am handling and managing my time so much more efficiently, because as you may or may not know, I do 2 of these videos a week lately, and that is just not enough time really to paint 2 full 1/6 scale statues as well as make videos and content about it. It's quite a pinch, I'm going to be honest, and so I've gotten pretty good at managing my time, and this is obviously one of the ways that I do it. I don't even know it myself sometimes, and I only realize this whilst I'm watching back my own footage and telling you about what I'm doing while doing it. Speaking of what I'm doing, I'm dry brushing the hair with a little bit of a orangey reddish color, and then I'm going to use a copper, and this is going to help bring out some of the detailed edges, but it won't look like copper unless you put too much paint on, in which case it will look like copper and it's going to look a bit dumb. So make sure your brush is nice and dry with that paint before you try painting it like that. I use a wood color. It doesn't matter which wood color. In my case, I used like a yellowy wood color, and the reason I went for a yellowy wood color is because this color complements quite nicely off of the pink that is on her bathrobe, which to be fair, the renders already have that color in it, so it makes sense. But obviously, I'm adjusting these colors ever so slightly to try and make it match the render as much as possible. I then stuck her hair onto her head and moved on to painting the eyes on the cat, because the eyes, from the last time I remembered, I used the wrong color for the eyebrows, and so I decided to not do that and only paint them once this time using the correct color, which is this dark camo brown kind of black color. I don't know why it's called that, but it's dark brown, literally just dark. If you took black and put a bit of brown in it, you probably have the same color, if I'm going to be totally honest. And so that is the color that I used. I used the same highlight skin tone to paint the inside of the eyes, and this is quite a nice color, especially for this. Usually with more realistic looking models, this color for the eyes, the whites of the eyes, looks a little bit weird, but on this specific type of model, I really like the way that that looks. It really gives a bright, cartoony looking eye, and it's very nice for me. This guy's eyes, I decided to do a little bit differently, and I used brown as the base and then a green on the inside of that, so that the eyes were actually green on this kitty cat. And then I obviously used black for his pupils and a very big, stretchy, white specular highlight with a tiny little one on the opposite side of that. I'm now going to take some burnt red and paint the eyebrows of this lady, which are very nicely sculpted. I must say that all of the details on this model are actually sculpted very well. Like, they are sculpted to be painted. That is the way that I feel, and I might just be a little bit biased because of the style of this being so close to the kind of thing that I like, that I'm just maybe being a little bit biased. But I'll be honest, all of the details, like features and stuff like that, they stood out so good. It was just so easy to paint those features because I knew exactly what they needed to be, and they stand out so nicely. The only thing that I did slightly different with this eye, instead of Magos purple in the beginning stages of painting the eyes, I decided to use the same paint that I used for her bathrobe. Not because it's matching her bathrobe or anything, but just to have a little bit of pink in the bottom of the eyelid before I then painted the whites of the eyes. And I leave a tiny little line of pink underneath at the bottom of the eyelid too, and this just kind of helps with a little bit more realism in the way that the eyes look, because they are a bit pinker on the bottom eyelid anyway, unless they have makeup obviously, but the only thing that I feel like this lady has as a makeup is really just the eyeliner and perhaps some lip something or another. And so to show those lips to be bright, I used a fluorescent magenta and orcish dermis mixed together to get that color. For her eyes, since she has a character she's looking at, I figured it's best to put her together and mark out where those eyes would be. I do this using any color, but just by placing a small dot where I think her pupil would actually be, and then I can come back in and work around that, building up a bigger and bigger circle for the main shape size of the iris. And I'm keeping a lot of this in here so you can see just how I build this up. I start out small. A lot of people say this is really difficult to do, and I agree with you, it isn't easy, but if you start out small, you can't really go wrong, because you can still make your circle bigger to one side or bigger to the other side. And this is exactly what I do, is I start out small and then I build the size of it up until the main shape of the irises are pretty much close to equal or equivalent of what they should be and looking in the right direction before I move on to painting the highlights. In this case, a brighter blue, and I add a bit of white into that blue to create a couple of little streaks just to add a bit more definition to the eyes, just to give them a little bit something extra before moving on to painting the pupils, which is literally just black. And I'm not painting, again, even the blacks and these eyes and everything, all of this paint has been watered down. It makes it easier to flow, and because it's easier to flow, it's better to paint with. The only color that I don't normally water down is, for example, that eye with the specular highlight. I don't water down the white as much. I don't really water down glosses, but you can water them down, by the way. If they're not flowing how you want them to flow, you can certainly water them down. Once I'm done with the gloss on the eyes, I can then put this model together by putting the torso onto the legs and then springing that hand up into her cuff of her arm and then calling this one done. I want to say that I actually really enjoyed painting this model. I actually am so happy with the outcome of it too, and this is just due to the style of this artwork. I really love the story that this model tells. Not many of the models that we paint nowadays have really got such good stories. Like, sure, you've got a character on a base and you've got something pertaining to that specific area and within a comic book or whatever, it's on the base, but it doesn't tell a story. They don't always all tell stories. This model, when you're looking at it, it tells a story. You know exactly what's going on here, and in my mind I can imagine literally my own wife doing exactly this, grabbing the one cat by the neck, pulling the roll of tissue paper out while my other cat is just stuffing around on the floor with it, and the freaking basket of everything is falling all over the place. There is movement, flow, storytelling. What a great model. Genuinely, I'm actually really happy with this model. I hope you learned something out of this video, and one of the most important things I hope is that if you did watch this video on the toilet, you will wash your hands, because if you don't, that's not cool, bro. One quick important thing to say is, if you are wanting to get a massive thank you, then join my Patreon, because I will thank you even more harder than I thank everyone else. And on my Patreon you get color palettes if you want color palettes. Also, we have options for STLs. Some of them are available in pre-supports and available now. Obviously they're all actually, I don't know what I'm saying, it's been a long day. This is the end of the video, obviously. Thank you very much to the Patreons. The cars outside are making a massive noise, making it hard for me to do voiceover. I'm so sick of you. Just if you don't like anything you saw in this video, obviously you can kindly now